All right. Let's see. There we go. I can start my video now. All right. Thanks, Lylan, and thanks, Dr. Data, for having me. I always love doing these lectures and really focusing on how we can incorporate lab testing into our practice a little bit better. Lab testing is the cornerstone of functional medicine and integrative medicine. So I love these webinars. And as always, I've got a big ask, a big task for me today. A lot of slides that I want to cover. We may have to do this in two parts, but I really love talking about the brain and brain health because it is what has allowed us to survive as a species and thrive as a species, right? It's not our speed, it's not our strength, it's our brain, and it's our ability to use our brain in new and creative ways. And that is being threatened in this day and age, more so than at any other time. And we also conversely have no greater opportunity in our history to optimize our brain as well. So we have this interesting dichotomy where everything in our world seems to be attacking the brain and degenerating our brain and threatening our brain and nervous system. And yet we have more tools than we ever have had, and we need to use those tools. So I love this lecture and being able to provide the big picture of how we use functional neurology and biochemistry to help not just mental health issues, but to optimize our brain for normal people as well. So the course objectives today, I want to review the brain and neurological health from a functional medicine standpoint, and how we go about treating it with labs and really looking at the functional biochemistry of our nervous system. I'll go through the major factors affecting our neurological function throughout our lifespan, and that includes, insults in the womb all the way, to old age. Provide immediate clinical action steps that we can use. So after this hour or so, you'll have some, hopefully, clinical tools that you haven't had and clinical tips and pearls that you didn't have at the start. And I'll give you solid clinical therapeutic interventions that you can use today. We're going to go through what I call the 12-point brain health model, the 12 things that we need to address from a functional medicine standpoint that ensures and restores functional brain health, optimal brain health. So there's 12 key areas that I've studied over the past, almost 20 years now, and I've narrowed it down into 12. But I'll focus on a few key areas today. Inflammation and oxidation is the number one killer of brain function. We'll talk a little bit about toxicity and environmental influence of cognitive health. Insulin resistance, how that contributes to neuronal cell dysfunction and death. Leaky gut, this leaky gut mitochondria brain axis, how leaky gut affects the mitochondria, which in turn affects the brain. And indeed, most brain disorders does come down to how the mitochondria are functioning. So we'll talk a lot about that. And finally, how to incorporate neurotransmitter testing and support that we can utilize in our practice to optimize brain health. And then we'll go through a case study. It's always good to have case studies. And it's, as always, this is a pretty in-depth case study, so I'll do my best to go through it. But how do we really apply this with our patients? So why is there so much talk about the brain? All brain-related problems are increasing at an alarming rate. There's an increase in developmental brain disorders. Autism is 1 in 30 kids right now. Actually, it's 1 in 24, just as of a month or two ago. Long COVID and brain fog affecting more than 60 million Americans. And even before long COVID, or whatever we want to call it, we have Epstein-Barr, and we have, chronic fatigue, and we've had, encephalomyelitis. All of these things have been on the rise. 2/3 of adults experience significant psychological dysfunction in their lifetime, whether that's anxiety, depression, eating disorders, or impaired cognition. And what's interesting, I'll get to this in the environmental toxicity section, but our average IQ over the last 25 years has decreased by about 10 to 15 points. So it is getting worse, much like it kind of mirrors testosterone levels in males and estrogen disorders in females, because it truly is related to a lot of these neuroendocrine disruptors. And 3/4 of those over the age of 75 experience severe memory loss and other neurological deficits. We can do better. We can do better. We should do better. Otherwise, we truly aren't going to survive as a species. So, current statistics, these are things that we can see. This is JAMA from 2017. Most psychiatric drug use reported by adults was long term. So most people on psychiatric drug use they're using it over 80%. They're using it long term. This isn't like just to get you over the hump, or we're talking about anxiolytics and sedatives and hypnotics and antidepressants, the anxiolytics, as I said. This is a great book. Robert Whitaker, he wrote this several years ago. Before the pandemic, it's even worse after the pandemic, obviously. The rate of antidepressant use in the United States has increased nearly 400% over the last 2 decades. Currently, 11% of Americans over the age of 12 take antidepressants. 23% of women take antidepressants. 1 in 6 adults take long-term psychiatric drugs. So this is something that we can do better. Right now, and this is 2020, so this is the latest statistics that I could gather. Certainly, it's gotten worse since then because of the pandemic. We all know that. But about 30% of Americans are on a long-term psychiatric medication. 30%, that's 1 in 3 people. And there are alternatives. There's better alternatives. So I'll talk about why, and then I'll talk about the alternatives and the solutions, because we have to understand the why in order to apply the correct solution. This is another good book that's gotten popular over the last few months. He wrote it last year or earlier this year, The Anxious Generation, How the Great Rewiring of Childhood is Causing an Epidemic of Mental Illness. This is just a sliver. He catches on to an important one, but he doesn't talk much about some of the other things that we'll talk about today, but certainly the impact of cell phones and smartphones, the decline of play-based childhoods, where we're out there, we're getting fresh air and we're playing unrestricted, the impact of social media, and, of course, physiologically, the blue light and melatonin, all these are critical in the first few years of life, and they're being destroyed. So that's the problem. we can go more into discussing the problem, but really the solution is early intervention and preconception. Most brain disorders, and this is an important point, most, if not all brain disorders start in the first 1,000 days. We call it the first 1,000 days. That's conception, first 9 months, and then the first 2 years of life. The first 1,000 days, all brain disorders can be traced back to genetic and epigenetic factors that happen in the first 2.5 years of life. And so the fetal environment of the first 1,000 days, the fetal environment is 75% of that impact. So and I've talked about this, I'm not going to talk about that in this lecture, but the importance of preconception planning. There are things that we can do preconceptually to ensure that the baby has as little of a chance of developing neurological deficits as possible. And in fact, we can increase IQ and magnify brain health in preconception. So if anyone is interested in learning more about that, that is not the scope of this lecture, but please contact me. You can go to my website, Dr. Brandon Lundell, Dr. Brandon Lundell. I have courses that cover this. I have protocols that you can use. Very simple things can go a long, long way. Things like phosphatidylcholine, just giving mothers 1,000 milligrams of phosphatidylcholine can virtually eliminate the possibility of schizophrenia and other neurological problems in the offspring. So I don't have time to play this, but I usually play this at the beginning of my my health talk. If you like Saturday Night Live, you can go on YouTube and watch this. But just type in Saturday Night Live and "Is my brain okay?" This was done a couple years ago, and it's a mock game show of "Is my brain okay?" and after COVID, and this guy, the host says, "So what did you do? Derek, before COVID? Oh, I was an IT engineer and a director of marketing. Oh, that's impressive. What do you do now? Mushrooms." So it's pretty funny. So take the time to give a little brevity to this, but it is a real issue, and COVID certainly made things a lot worse. So uh, so I've developed over the years this 12-point brain health program. The neurological system, as I said, is the most susceptible to modern day insults. We truly live in a brain degenerative world. So we need comprehensive support for brain function from conception to death. And these functional neurology principles really the only way to ensure and optimize brain function. So these are all 12. I'll go through a few of them today. Certainly gut health, number one up here. As we know, we'll talk a little bit about that. The anti-inflammatory diet, my 7R protocol for healing leaky gut, the microbiome support, the gut-brain axis. Unless you've lived under a rock, we do know the importance of it. But we are learning more, not only about the importance of it, but about simple ways we can optimize our gut and brain communication. But truly, that is the most important, in my opinion, the most important discovery in the last 50 to 100 years about brain health is the gut-brain bidirectional communication. The need for exercise and interestingly enough, balance and proprioception is extremely important for brain health. Mental health, doing things to support your mental health is psychological health, relaxation response, your mindful practice. Thoughts can create so much inflammation in the brain, abnormal thoughts. And then inflammation in the brain can cause abnormal thoughts or things like, obsessive compulsive disorders and catastrophic thinking. It is truly an inflammatory disorder. So we'll talk a little bit about that. And inflammation, weight management is super important because we know excess fatty tissue secretes cytokines that also cross the blood-brain barrier and interfere with brain function. We need to treat infections. That's a huge source of inflammation, not just long COVID, but studies that show herpes and Epstein-Barr, those infections increase your risk for degenerative brain disorders. A lot of antioxidant support and monitoring with the labs. We'll talk a little bit about that. Insulin sensitivity, so important. Detoxification, we'll talk about that. Methylation is probably, of all 12 of these, the single greatest, other than the gut, because abnormal methylation not only destroys brain development and interferes with brain development, but it destroys brain function throughout the lifespan. Oxygenation, so making sure that you are breathing enough and you're addressing things like anemia and iron optimization and B12 optimization and circulation support. Abnormal circulation and cardiovascular disease affects the brain, and it really comes down to how it affects oxygenation and nutrient delivery. We'll talk about specific nutrition and supplements, targeted nootropics, if you will, targeted nutrients, anti-inflammatories, mitochondrial support, vitamin D, things like that. Hormone balance, extremely important. Thyroid function, DHEA, pregnenolone, adrenal health, your sex hormones. We know the interplay between the neuroendocrine system. In fact, it should just be called the neuroendocrine system, not the nervous system or the endocrine system. They work in concert so deeply and so interconnectedly that it is impossible to separate the two in any kind of functional medicine or medical practice. So I'm a proponent of changing the name to neuroendocrine system, not just the nervous system or the endocrine system. So Neurotransmitters, we'll talk a lot about that today, how to optimize the neurotransmitter production and metabolism. And finally, sleep and circadian rhythm, how important that is throughout the lifespan to brain health. Getting up at the same time, exercising in the morning. Melatonin deficiencies are pretty rampant. And not only that, but melatonin as a nutraceutical, even if your melatonin levels are okay, using melatonin as a nutraceutical, super physiological amounts at times during brain development, as well as throughout your lifespan, can dramatically increase and protect your brain, increase brain function. So let's get into just a few of these. I've developed my own anti-inflammatory diet, kind of the base diet that I think 80% of your people's diet should be centered around. And then in my practice, we do things like food sensitivity testing to further refine the inflammatory impact of diet. We run stool tests in my practice a lot. So optimizing the microbiome, we can spend, I spend an entire weekend, I spend an entire 12 hours talking about the gut and the microbiome in my nutritional pathology course. My nutritional pathology course is probably the most in-depth practical course in functional medicine out there. So again, you can go to my website and look at the 6 courses. And then I just added this neurology course. So you can take any of the courses by themselves or as the nutritional pathology certification program. So I created this gut human health matrix, how the gut is at the center of our neuroendocrine system, our mitochondria, our structure. So the gut joint axis is huge. I practice chiropractic medicine, and we do a lot of physical medicine. Structure determines function, function determines structure. So I think in a lot of functional medicine practices, we forget to address the structure, but how important the gut is to joint health and inflammation. And, when people come in with disc problems or with knee problems, no one looks at the gut. And not in traditional medicine, no one is taught. An orthopedic surgeon or an orthopedic doctor is never taught to look at, why would they? I'm not a gut doctor. Why would I look at the gut when someone has arthritis and inflammation? But it is one of the biggest drivers of that. The gut immune system, the gut genome and epigenome, how our gut and microbiome affects our own genetics and our own epigenetics. Fertility and development gets its own gut health matrix. And then finally, how the gut affects the liver and detoxification through the portal hepatic system. So the scope of this lecture today isn't to get into specifically every one of these, but to remind and to give a few clinical pearls on how important it is. Exercising every day, and we'll get more into it with the case study. Exercising every day is the only proven reproducible way, time and time and time again, to increase the mitochondria throughout the body and in the brain. This is my 5-element exercise plan that has to have all 5 of these. If you want more information on this, feel free to contact my office and we'll give you more information. I also have a YouTube channel. So you can just go to YouTube and type in Dr. Brandon Lundell. Don't type in Dr. Lundell. I have a distant cousin who's a cardiologist who also is into health and medicine. So it must run in the family. But type in Dr. Brandon Lundell. And he doesn't take great care of himself. So you'll see the difference between, you'll know it's not me, but I go more into what this 5-element is, what kind of stretching, what kind of core, what kind of weight training program. And again, I've been refining this and doing this for 20 years. So it really is something that I've had a lot of experience with. But that balance and proprioception piece, I want to first study here. Balance training improves memory and spatial cognition in healthy adults. How do we optimize brain function? We're not just talking about treating disease. We're also talking about maximizing everyone's brain health, whether you're healthy or somewhat healthy or you're not. Balance training should be a really important piece in all of your training, and it doesn't get a lot of a lot of press, if you will. People are, more into weight training and how that increases testosterone and cardiovascular. But that's why it's part of the five element, this balance and proprioception piece down here. So we have a lot of studies on that. Mental health, as I said, the Harvard study, the longest running study on health and happiness, shows that the most important piece for brain health, preserving brain health, is healthy relationships. And I don't know about you, but I certainly wasn't modeled a ton of healthy relationships. And I think that's pretty common. We have to learn how to have healthy relationships. And especially as men, I'll just put a little thing out there. Men are certainly not taught, I think even less than women, on how to maintain and have healthy relationships. So that's something that I think is really important and that I'm changing. And I'm lucky enough to have two sons. I just had a new son a few months ago. So it's really a joy to be able to help them develop healthy relationships with other men and with women. So, but these books are really important. Words Can Change Your Brain is another really great book. The How of Happiness. So there's a lot of information out there on how to change our thinking, because truly our thoughts can change. Our thoughts are one of the greatest epigenetic factors in brain health. I'll repeat that. Our own thoughts is one of the greatest epigenetic factors in our brain health. We can either be producing brain plasticity in our thoughts, or we're producing brain degeneration and inflammation with our own thoughts. So it's a two-way street. And this is a great book. I've learned a lot from Martin Seligman. He is the father. He's a Harvard-trained psychologist, and he still teaches at Harvard. He developed the entire psychological subdiscipline of positive psychology. Not how do we treat schizophrenia and depression and how do we keep people from committing suicide. That's important and noble, but largely what was ignored is how do we take an average person, make them even better. So this is a great book called Learned Optimism, How to Change Your Mind in Your Life. And he talks about how we explain things that happen in our life. So if something negative happens, we all have this because it's what's helped us survive. The pessimistic, right? The person who's always on the lookout for something negative to happen. That is, we all have some of those genes that have persisted, and those genes exist in how we express serotonin receptors and how we express dopamine receptors, but we can change those. It's also why early life trauma is so damaging, because it changes the expression, the expression of our receptors. But if you have this pessimistic style, you kind of say, "Oh, this always happens to me. Man, this ruins everything. I'm always at fault. I'm always doing something wrong." Versus, a more optimistic style. "Oh, this will pass. This is just one. Yep, this is just one situation. This isn't entirely my fault." It's not about not looking at yourself honestly, but yeah, different ways of becoming more optimistic. A basic example is you try to sell your car and you're not, no one's buying your car, and yeah, man, this always happens to me. This is man, I can never sell anything. What's wrong with me? Versus, man, yeah, the market's really slow right now. I guess I could either change the price or I can wait it out. So those things become really, really important on a daily basis. So now back to some of the biochemistry, inflammation and oxidation. This is where finding and treating hidden chronic infections, doing laboratory evaluations such as your viral and stool panels, looking at gut infections and dysbiosis, because all of these increase the risk of autoimmunity, and leaky gut causes or creates a lot of antibodies to brain tissue as well. So one of the simplest things you can do on all your patients, if you aren't already, is addressing CRP. CRP is related to memory and medial temporal brain volume in older adults. So, but this is CRP throughout the lifetime. If you're waiting to run CRP until you're 60 years old, you're missing it, because an elevated CRP at 25 or at 10 or at 50 is destroying your brain. So running CRP and finding the sources of why CRP is elevated in the first place, that is so important. Why do you have detectable levels of CRP? There is no safe level of CRP. Less than 0.5 is really the only safe level of CRP. So these findings underscore the potential role of inflammation in cognitive aging, and how we can modify aging through monitoring and modifying inflammation. And so this is just a schematic of in that study of CRP, and how those with the highest levels of CRP had much lower hippocampal volumes and brainstem volumes. So and it really comes down to the blood-brain barrier, really making sure that our blood-brain barrier is intact. And I would argue that most people with leaky gut have leaky brain, but in many cases, leaky brain could start even long before leaky gut. But if you have both leaky gut and leaky brain, think of it as two radios. You've got how the gut and brain communicate with each other. It's like a radio signal. And it does so through interleukins and cytokines. That's your FM 101 signal. And so if the astrocytes from the gut are putting out these CRP and interleukins, these signals from undigested food particles and the microbial byproducts, all of those things from the gut, that is being directly transmitted, if you don't like heavy metal, and it's basically, it's the heavy metal station at that point, and that's blaring and that's blasting in the gut. And it's through the astrocyte in the gut is the transmitter, and the astrocyte in the brain is the receiver. And that's how it's communicating, and that's how it's doing damage. So repairing, we'll talk a little bit about how we repair and restore. And I would argue that almost everyone, if not everyone, with a brain disorder, whether it's, relatively mild depression or it's schizophrenia and autism, has an impaired blood-brain barrier. And it's a two-way street. Inflammation from the brain is caused by a faltered blood-brain barrier, but inflammation in the brain itself can cause a faulty blood-brain barrier. So we'll talk a little bit about that. One of the first clinical two pearls I'll give today is the grapeseed extract. It is absolutely one of my favorite. It's phenomenal. It's effective. It's a potent antioxidant. It increases NRF2 and nitric oxide. For repairing the blood-brain barrier, it is absolutely one of my go-tos because it's easily absorbed from the diet. Curcumin is good too, but it doesn't cross the blood-brain barrier very easily. It's hard to absorb sometimes. Certainly it's good, but grapeseed, it repairs vascular brain permeability, stabilizes blood sugar, modulates serotonin and dopamine, increases brain-derived neurotrophic factor, decreases NF-kappa B and CRP, and it's a potent mitochondrial support agent. So grapeseed and skin extracts here, it's mitochondrial, it reverses mitochondrial apoptosis, it decreases the inflammatory effect and neurodegeneration, and ultimately cognitive and memory dysfunction. So therapeutic doses is the other really important point when it comes to functional medicine and doing functional medicine in a way that works. Usually, so we're talking, a lot of times we have two doses. We have preventative doses, and then we have treatment doses. Preventative doses, if you want to just take it on a daily basis, 400 to 600 milligrams is fine. That's really enough to preserve brain function, to optimize, to support your brain if you're doing okay. But if you are truly dealing with a leaky brain and an impaired blood-brain barrier permeability, then you want about 2,000 milligrams a day. And this is a principle that's really, really important. I just did a talk on how to do supplements effectively. So you can go to my YouTube channel, or you can email me and I'll send it to you. How to do supplements effectively in clinical medicine is crucial. It's one of the greatest areas of confusion in functional medicine. And it's one of the reasons why I started a functional medicine mentorship group. So this is different than my nutritional pathology certification. I offer a 6-month mentorship. Think of me as your safety net. I teach you these things, how to take cases and how to make sure that you're dosing properly, and whether you're having trouble in your practice, and attracting patients or keeping patients, or whether you're having trouble clinically. We do a deep dive for 6 months to make sure that you are a much more effective clinician and practice manager, right? Well, we go into both. So it's something that I've found is so desperately needed. We all have a lot of education out there, most of us, right? Education is not the problem, it's implementation. So good education and implementation, and that second piece of how do I take all this knowledge and really be successful and help thousands and thousands of people, which is what most of us really want to do, right? We don't want to just have all the knowledge and not put it to use. So I'll talk a little bit more about my mentorship program as well at the end of this. Just so many studies. I've got thousands of studies. Grapeseed and skin extracts. This is a great, review article, just how disease protective it is, what an potent antioxidant it is, neuroprotective properties, strong bioavailability, low side effect profile. It reduces tumor growth, enhances cardiovascular and brain health. And this study looked at, over 90 peer-reviewed journals, and just really, really good article if you want that. And if you want any of these articles, the actual articles, feel free to email me with the name of the article, and I'd be happy to. A lot of these are free anyway. Some of them aren't, though. I've paid, I don't know, over the years, I've paid tens of thousands of dollars for studies. And thank God since COVID, more and more studies are free. But here we are. We have another oxidative stress, pro-oxidants and antioxidants. Antioxidants remain the hallmark of disease prevention. So we'll go a little bit more into the antioxidants. So glutathione, redox imbalance, and brain disorders. This is the inflammation and oxidation that I'm talking about. We in addition to the inflammatory proteins and the CRP and the interleukins and the astrocyte activation, we almost always see a decrease in the bioavailability of glutathione in the brain, in all brain disorders, and in your average person as well. N-acetylcysteine is another one of my absolute top go-tos in every practice, and it is very misunderstood and underutilized. It does so many things in the body, but I'm going to talk just for a second about the importance of N-acetylcysteine versus glutathione administration. Glutathione does not get transported inside the cell very easily, if at all. That's actually still up for debate. No actual glutathione transporter has been found in any cell in the body. Sometimes if you have super high amounts, it can shove through there and sort of sneak in through other receptors, through other ligands. But there is no direct transport system for glutathione inside the cell. So extracellular glutathione is important. So if you want to take glutathione extracellularly, there's nothing wrong with that. It still is a good antioxidant extracellularly. It helps with detoxification. It helps stimulate other receptors, no problem. But the power and the magic of glutathione is inside the cell. And the only proven way to increase glutathione amounts inside the cell is through cysteine, through this, right down here, you see this excitatory amino acid complex or excitatory amino acid transport system. Cysteine is what gets transported inside the cell, inside the neuron, one. And it is complexed with glutamine and glycine with ATP. So you need to have some ATP as well. And then glutathione is made inside the cell to protect the mitochondria, which helps you make more ATP. So we're going to talk a little bit about when we have lowered ATP, what do we do? And my favorite go-to for lowered ATP is actually ribose. And there's others, CoQ10. We'll get to mitochondrial support. But again, I do have an entire course on mitochondrial health. But my point today is to give you really potent and powerful tips on how to use some of these tools that we have. So N-acetylcysteine, in general, if you're just doing it on a daily basis for prevention, 600, 500 to 1,000 milligrams a day, no problem. If we're dealing with any type of brain disorder, or you temporarily want to boost your brain health, if you're tired, sometimes when I'm working on lectures or notes in the clinic really late, I'll do 3 to 4, even 5 grams of N-acetylcysteine. And it has so many effects in the body. I don't have time to go into everything that N-acetylcysteine does, but it's far more than just increasing glutathione. That is its main mechanism, but it's a chelator, it's a direct antioxidant, it's a direct free radical scavenger. It stimulates mitochondrial proteins and mitochondrial autophagy, which helps proper apoptosis. So extremely, extremely important. But again, dosing. Not only do you need to know what therapy is appropriate for which patient, but also at what dose and at what time. Speaking of N-acetylcysteine and other things that it does, it dramatically improves insulin sensitivity by the main mechanism is repairing the insulin receptor. And everyone with insulin insensitivity, elevated blood sugar, elevated hemoglobin A1C, elevated fructosamine, all of those things, their insulin receptors and the post receptor is the main problem. So N-acetylcysteine, alpha lipoic acid, essential fatty acids, magnesium in your cofactors, all of those are extremely, extremely important. We know insulin resistance causes neuronal cell death through multiple mechanisms, through the alpha beta protein toxicity, through the tau hyperphosphorylation, which causes microtubule breakdown and impaired axonal transport. It causes direct oxidative stress and caspase activation and mitochondrial dysfunction, which causes neuronal cell death. It causes more inflammatory cytokines like interleukin-1, beta, interleukin-6, tumor necrosis factor alpha, and it is at the core of it, it's insulin resistance. And not only what's not shown here is direct glucotoxicity. And I don't know if I included this. So glucotoxicity, glucose levels and risk of dementia. A glucose level at 100 is what's average. Like an average glucose level of 100 will give you a 75% chance of developing diabetes as well as dementia. Okay, so that's your one odds ratio. Really, your average blood sugar, and that means postprandial, preprandial, needs to be less than 90 to lower your hazard ratio of developing dementia, even without diabetes. And your hemoglobin A1C, that means it needs to be at a 5.2 or less throughout your lifetime on average in order to reduce your risk of dementia. So it is extremely, extremely important to monitor those. And a lot of the damage is done due to the insulin resistance, as we said, but also to glucotoxicity itself. Okay, because glucose, there are several cells in the brain that don't require insulin, and glucose, when it's above 90, has direct access into the cell, and it will build up in the cell, and especially if there's mitochondrial dysfunction, and cause direct glucotoxicity. All right, detoxification. we really need to live an antitoxin lifestyle. Look at your beauty products, your foods, looking at air purifiers in your home, water purifiers. We are getting bombarded with toxins in every single second of the body, of the day, in every part of our body. So testing for and removing heavy metals and chemicals becomes a potent clinical tool in treating and preventing brain disorders. And a lot of kids who have brain issues have heavy metals and impaired liver toxicity, impaired liver detoxification abilities. So it's really important to do that. So just a few studies here on industrial chemicals. Pesticides and solvents are linked to neurodegenerative diseases. We know that. That we can actually induce Parkinson's disease and dementia by giving lab animals some of these at relatively low amounts. Heavy metals, lead, mercury, even zinc and copper and arsenic at high levels can increase the risk of cognitive deficits. Of course, low levels of zinc and mercury and essential nutrients are also a big cause of brain, degeneration and suboptimal brain function. Aluminum is found to be elevated 2 to 3-fold in patients with dementia. So, pretty amazing. And so it's a matter of where is the exposure coming from, as well as is it an inability to decrease or excrete it, as well as is there a susceptibility? And usually the susceptibility to heavy metals and toxins comes around low glutathione and low antioxidants, because the mechanism of damage is impairing the mitochondria. That's how these things do their damage. So we see different toxicants. One, they cross the blood-brain barrier when there's a dysfunctional blood-brain barrier. Normally excluded toxicants can now access direct access to neurons, astrocytes, microglial cells, and oligodendrocytes. And we can see that it affects neurotransmission, the neuroendocrine system. It activates monoamine oxidase systems, and it causes direct cytotoxic activity in the mitochondria and in the brain cells, in the myelin sheath, and in the astrocytes. Electromagnetic field is also really important. Prolonged exposure to electromagnetic frequencies promote inflammatory responses and oxidative stress. There's no doubt that that is something that we want to be aware of and address. So, don't carry your cell phone around next to your head. That's, simple things though. Turning your Wi-Fi off at night. There's lots of really helpful things that you can do. That's, everything from just doing speakerphone to creating a Faraday cage around your house. There's no doubt that electromagnetic fields, though, really are important. And finally, air pollution and things, like I said, having an air purifier in your house. I use a company called Healthways, and all of this is in my nutritional pathology course. So methylation, not going to talk much about that unless you've lived under a rock. I think most people know how to at least, basically address it, checking for your SAMe levels. But there's just some studies here. Critical levels of brain shrinkage happen when homocysteine levels are above 11. We know it. And so keeping it certainly below 9 would be optimal, 8 or 9. But when you start to get 11, that's when we see significant advanced shrinkage of the brain. And yes, studies that show treating it with polymethyl Bs, your methylcobalamin, B6, methylfolate, B2, B3, that does slow brain shrinkage, lowers the plasma homocysteine, and can reverse, not just decline the aging or slow the aging, but reverse the aging as well. Oxygenation, as I said, just simple things from addressing anemia to making sure that you're breathing every day. This is why I think Wim Hof and those kinds of things have become popular over the last few years. But Patrick McEwen is kind of really, he's done the most studies and the most research on breathing, and he gives the most clinical tips and tools, breathing light, breathing slow, breathing deep. this is something that I have all of my patients, I address in all of my patients, making sure that they are, one of the greatest tools I have in my practice is a pulse ox. And you put a pulse ox on somebody, you don't even tell them what you're doing. You just put the pulse ox on, you continue talking to them. And then you look at it and they're at an 89 or a 92, and that's not good. We should always be at a 98 or above. Everyone should be at a 98, 97 or above. And you just, and then I tell my patient, hey, check out your pulse ox. This is what's happening on a daily basis. This is what's happening most of the day. And so then I just have them take 10 deep breaths. Breathe light, breathe. That wasn't a light one, but you're breathing light, you're breathing deep, but you're breathing slow. You're exhaling slower than you're inhaling. There's a lot of tools. I like box breathing myself. Into the count of 8, hold to the count of 8, breathe out to the count of 8, hold to the count of 8. Lots of different ways of doing it. And then, sure enough, with most patients, it comes back up to a 98 after 10 breaths. If it doesn't, then you need to dig a little bit deeper. Okay, are we dealing with COPD? Or are we dealing with, inflammation in the lungs? Are we dealing with anemia or a blood disorder? Those kinds of things. So the other clinical thing that I use tool in my practice is hyperbaric. It's one of the most phenomenal tools. And I just wanted to show a quick study here about a new finding that we've really seen in the last year or two about how hyperbaric changes the microbiome, completely changes the microbiome. It changes all of the different phyla and restores Akkermansia and restore, which is really important. It balances out the glutamate and glutamine. It increases short chain fatty acids, which is another one that I'll get into a little bit later. But here, this is from that same study. We have leaky gut, and with just a few treatments of hyperbaric, it completely balances out your Firmicutes, Bacteroides, your bile acids, mucous membranes, brush border, inflammatory proteins changes completely. So pretty cool. And this is in, ulcerative colitis as well. So we're not talking about just your average person, but even in severe degeneration. Specific nutrients and supplementation. We've talked about methylation. We've talked about inflammation. We've talked about vascular support. We've talked about mitochondria, CoQ10, lipoic acid, N-acetylcysteine, glutathione, carnitine. Specific nootropics that I like, taurine is one of my favorite, and I'll get into that. That's relatively underutilized and misunderstood amino acid as well. Glycans, mushroom glycans, PQQ is one of my favorite, ginkgo, vinpocetine, pine bark extract. We can go on and on, but what I will tell you and what I want you to walk away with today is the understanding that nootropics do not work unless you have all of these other things in place. You can take all the ginkgo you want, and that might improve oxygenation a little bit, but if your anemia isn't optimized, if your methylation isn't optimized, if your insulin sensitivity isn't optimized, it's not doing much, and you're wasting your money and potentially your patients as well. If your gut isn't healthy, forget it. None of these things are going to have a lasting impact. Vitamin D levels for brain health, the optimal blood levels are 40 to 60 long term. Doesn't mean that at times you don't need more of that. But the problem with telling you 5,000 IUs a day or 125 milligrams a day, the problem with that is everyone's absorption and utilization rate is different. You need blood tests at regular intervals to ensure that they're absorbing and that you find the right dose for the right patient. But staying between 40 and 60 long term is the target goal. And I have lots of studies to back that up as well. Balance your hormones, as I said, that's a whole nother talk there, but it's important to mention. And neurotransmitter support, we'll get into this with a case study. And circadian rhythms. So I would say the greatest tidbit I can offer you with that I've found the most useful is running your melatonin tests. Doctor's Data has a great melatonin test that I run with almost every adrenal and hormone test that I run. But even as a nootropic, even as something that you want to do, even if normal levels exist, you can still do melatonin. And so that's really important, as well as waking up the same time every morning and doing exercise within the first 30 minutes. Even it can be brief, but intense. Doing 5-10 minutes within the first 30 minutes of waking up, dramatic improvements over all other exercise times of the day. Now, I always say any time to exercise is a good time, better than none. So keep that in mind. Any exercise is better than no exercise. But I always try to, even if I get on the elliptical and do 3 or 4 1-minute intervals in the morning, my day is dramatically different when I do that. Okay. So here we go. I have 5 minutes to go into a case study. We might go a little bit over, but this will be recorded, and this will, you can go back and listen to this. 23-year-old female with systemic and neurological inflammation. I have many case studies where it's an older person. I wanted to, we're seeing more and more young adults with problems. So I wanted to address that in this lecture, and how I and many other functional, neurologists and functional medicine practitioners approach this. So, 22-year-old female, severe depression. We're not talking about just, I don't know what to do with my life, and I'm still living at home. This is severe depression. She was hospitalized, 6 months prior to seeing me. Anxiety, ADHD, and she's on polypharmacy. She was put on Prozac, Wellbutrin, Remeron, and Vyvanse. If you're not familiar with those, basically, SSRIs and norepinephrine and epinephrine drugs, and Remeron is, melatonin. Basically, it drives melatonin up in the brain. Vyvanse is an ADD medication, so it's a stimulant. She's on all of this polypharmacy and has been for years. And this is what I was saying in the beginning. We are in a severe crisis, and the number one prescription drug class population is in our kids. That is growing by leaps and bounds, and it's really unnecessary and damaging and harmful. And it's hooking people into the pharmaceutical system, mental health system, for the rest of their lives. Once you are in this, it's very, very difficult to get out. And I'm not saying that these don't have their place. They absolutely have their place. But 99% of people who are put on these have no exit plan. It's like, here, you're on this for the rest of your life. And that is bad medicine. That is false, bad medicine. Treating the causes while you are on these medications in order to address the root causes is truly integrative medicine. Weight gain, fatigue. She was hypo sweating, hypoperfuse. So, she couldn't even go out of the house, and she would just start sweating. She had nausea, bloating, some vomiting, irregular periods. So severe PMDD, which is more severe than PMS. She had a hormonal IUD and found some relief, but still highly variable. She still felt her periods. She still got nauseous around her, menses. So she also had chronic pain in the low back, neck, and shoulders. And a lot of people on polypharmacy, it actually drives up pain sensation and pain fibers. And I have, with Doctor's Data, I actually gave this talk a couple years ago. I don't know if it's still on their website, but I gave a talk about pain sensitization and how that the nervous system drives pain sensitization. Chronic pain in the low back, neck, and shoulders. She was on diclofenac, gabapentin, with very little relief. This was her Doctor's Data intake. So when we did an adrenal stress test, you can just see it here. Difficulty concentrating, a 3. Increased forgetfulness, a 3. Foggy thinking, a 3. Depressed, mood swings, stress, anxious, irritable, decreased mental sharpness, morning fatigue, afternoon fatigue. She didn't have as much evening fatigue, but that's because, she was on all those stimulants. Excessive worry, diminished motivation. I mean, on and on and on. So She tried ketamine with some relief, but it was short-lived. She experimented with everything. I mean, these are desperate people. Marijuana, psilocybin, MDMA, all gave temporary relief, but nothing long-lasting. She can't hold a job. She can't go to school. Her family life isn't horrible, but she did come from a split family, and not a lot of trauma, but certainly I wouldn't say a lot of optimal healthy support. Parents were not very healthy at conception. The mother was prone to anxiety and the pregnancy was stressful. That is epigenetically programming the baby. When I know it's a lot of responsibility, but we need to know those things, and the thoughts and the emotional stability of the mom while pregnant is really important. So men, we need to make sure that they're happy and they're healthy, and that we're doing our job as well. So that's the epigenetic inheritance of our mood is actually even more than our genetics. So some things to consider when treating from a functional medicine perspective. What is your approach here? Okay. What are you thinking? What do you know so far about what's really happening inside her mind and body? She's overweight. She's probably got leaky gut. She's got no motivation. So from here, what labs do you want to run? In my classes, in my nutritional pathology course, and in my mentorship, I teach you how to truly think like a functional medicine doctor. That's what I want. I don't want you to rely on me for the rest of your career or my career. I'm going to teach you how to think like this so that you can teach it to other doctors as well. So what treatments are you already thinking about? Oh, much more than Kava or St. John's wort, hopefully, although those aren't bad options. But and what are the challenges to a patient without motivation? She has some motivation, but no ability, or maybe they have plenty of ability, but no motivation. So how do you finally manage polypharmacy? These are really important considerations. As a chiropractor in most states, I don't have the scope of practice to take people off medications. I do in New Mexico, but some medications. But how do you address that? And again, that's something that I go over in my mentorship classes as well. How do we let the labs and let her body dictate when it's time to transition from the meds, while keeping the prescribing physician practitioner in the loop? We're not asking permission from someone who doesn't know functional medicine, but we're definitely just letting them know what we're doing. That's the best medicine you can do. Her blood sugar actually wasn't too bad, believe it or not. A couple things that I will point out: her bun is low, and that is usually because there's not a lot of good bacteria, or there's not a lot of protein in the diet. So we want to look at both. Is her nitrogen balance positive? So enough proteins, which are the precursors to neurotransmitters, or is there not enough bacteria in the gut producing those nitrogen compounds? And both were the case for her. Her albumin was a little bit elevated, so chronic dehydration is something also to look at in your patients. Her vitamin D was low, so that's something that needs to be addressed. Her cholesterol, her triglycerides were elevated. So while she didn't show elevated hemoglobin A1C or elevated blood sugar that much, her metabolism of glucose still likely isn't optimal because her triglycerides are elevated. So, and here her CRP at 3.71, she didn't have any infection. There wasn't any real direct reason for CRP to be elevated. This is systemic chronic inflammation. And what I'll say about that, really important, is that CRP is a rule-in test for inflammation, not a rule-out test. So just because CRP is normal does not mean that person is not inflamed. There's many different pathways of inflammation, but for her, clearly it was leaky gut. Thyroglobulin antibody was elevated, so that's another indicator that she has leaky gut, and that's driving up the antibody production in the androcyte or in the oligodendrocytes in the antigen-presenting cells in the gut. So, CBC, CMP relatively normal, but we also see here that she had a 2+ in the white blood cell esterase and white blood cells in the urine, as well as a few bacteria that were seen on microscopy. This is dysbiosis, what we call multifocal dysbiosis. This is a clue that she wasn't having any experiences of a UTI, yet she was having a subclinical UTI, or what we call dysbiosis, and it's contributing to systemic inflammation. Does she need an antibiotic? Probably not. Is she at risk for a kidney infection? Probably not, but it is bacteria that are in the genitourinary tract that shouldn't be there and causing inflammation. She also had elevated Epstein-Barr. Anything above like 200 or 300 here, in my opinion, even in the absence of IgM, that tells you that that's likely reactivated, or at least it's relatively active. So we ran a food sensitivity test, not a ton, but dairy is off the chart, and she was eating a lot of it. Some tomatoes here. She had some beef. She was eating a lot of beef and gliadin. So she had the classic leaky gut from gluten and dairy and sugar. And over here, we see Candida antibody is high, so she likely has yeast in the gut. How do we confirm this? We do a stool test. We need to confirm what's happening. And I'll get to the stool test in a minute. I like running amino acids. As I said before, her BUN was low, and this is a different lab confirming the same thing, that her nitrogen balance is low, and our neurotransmitters, most of them are amino acid based. So here we see her lysine, her tryptophan, her leucine, her valine, phenylalanine, arginine, taurine. All of these are really low. In general, we can see this low amino acid balance. That's another indicator of leaky gut. She wasn't a vegetarian. She was eating plenty of meat, but she wasn't absorbing it and utilizing it. So her gut needs to be addressed through the 7R program. And you can email me for that. I mean, everyone has their leaky gut protocol. But if you're new to this or you want to know my approach, you can email me at hhc@drbrandonlundell.com, or go to my website and you can submit a contact form. Okay. So her potassium was a little elevated because her cells are undergoing oxidative stress, and they're spilling the potassium into the blood. She didn't have any short-term exposure of toxic elements, but sometimes in these cases, it may not be the first thing we start off with, but we often go into heavy metal testing and doing challenge testing with doctors' data, and we do DMSA testing for that. And again, if you want my protocols for that, you can email me. So just write these down and write what you're asking for, and we can provide that for you. Her vitamin E is a little bit low. Her beta carotene is really low because she's not eating any vegetables. That's where we get our beta carotene. So that kind of gives you a clue about her diet. Her glutathione isn't, completely non-existent, but it's certainly not, optimal. So, this is a population-based average. She's average when it comes to the population. We want to be up here. So some oxidative stress, 8-hydroxy-2-deoxyguanosine is a good oxidative stress marker in the genes. And again, another test showing low vitamin D. Her essential fatty acids were low. Total omega-3s were in the second quintile, not good. And as I said before, you can use supplements in two ways. One, to get to just optimal levels, and that's a good preventative dose, but you can use it in supra-physiological amounts. We want all of these pegged over here in order to elicit an anti-inflammatory response, a brain neurogenesis response, a cardiovascular, an anti-inflammatory response in the gut. That often takes 5 to 10 grams of fish oils, not a nice maintenance dose of 1 to 2 grams. She had her omega-6s out of balance too. So really, truly, in mental health issues, I cannot overstate the importance of using fish oils as a pharmaceutical or as a nutraceutical. We're not doing it to just, I'm protecting my heart health, I'm taking a krill a day. We're talking tablespoons of fish oil, especially when we're dealing with a mental health issue, or chronic fatigue or things like that. So this is what I will teach you in the nutritional pathology course and in the mentorship. Therapeutic dosing. It is the area that most practitioners get wrong because, or at least are confused about, because there's just not a lot of good objective training out there. You have a lot of supplement companies that offer good training, but it might just be too narrow in certain topics. So her beta hydroxybutyrate was very elevated. That is an early indicator of insulin resistance. So even though her blood test didn't show it, her glucose and her hemoglobin A1C, her cells are showing it. And this is all of your mitochondria markers, and all of her mitochondrial markers are pegged to the right. So her Krebs cycle not working at all. And then we see that her 3-methyl-4 hydroxyphenylglycol is low. This is a metabolite of dopamine and epinephrine and norepinephrine. So we'll get into that as well. And finally, some of her compounds of bacterial yeast and fungal origin really higher. Benzoate is over 10, 20 times higher than normal. So that's often from either the microbiome and or toxin exposure, because toxins, benzoates in chemicals that we're exposed to. And likely some of the benzoates might have even been coming from the pharmaceuticals that she was on as well. So here's the stool test we ran. She did have candida, just like that other test showed, but we confirmed it here. She had candida, she had Klebsiella, and she had staph and strep in her gut at levels we shouldn't see. So she had severe dysbiosis. She will never get better until her microbiome is addressed. And again, so I'll talk to you a little bit about that, but we did a dysbiosis protocol for her, something that I've developed over the years, which is a 2-month regeneration of getting rid of the bad bacteria and recolonizing. And there's a specific way to do it where you load the antimicrobials for 10 days, and then you do load the probiotics for 10 days, and you repeat that for a couple of months. And it is 80% effective the first time. Sometimes we have to do it twice. I just had a patient the other day who did the dysbiosis protocol 1 round of the 2 months. And she said that for years she had really bad toenail fungus. And 2 months on this protocol, the toenail fungus was gone, completely gone. And she had tried everything to get rid of her toenail fungus. So this really does work. It's not just in the gut, but supports the immune system and antifungal and antimicrobial throughout the body. And here I want to draw everyone's attention to her low short chain fatty acids. If you have low short chain fatty acids, this is going to, if it's not already manifesting as a brain disorder, lowered cognition, chronic fatigue, it is setting you up dramatically for brain disorders in the future. And short chain fatty acids are being more and more studied, and we're seeing the direct connection between short chain fatty acids throughout your lifetime, not just when you get dementia, but if you've had low short chain fatty acids throughout your lifetime, you're almost assured to get some kind of cognitive decline in dementia. So these short chain fatty acids are really, really important. So a couple studies here. Short chain fatty acid producing bacteria, especially sensitive to antibiotics. So, if you've had even 1 course of antibiotic in your lifetime, you're likely to have lower short chain fatty acids. This is just a schematic of everything that the gut does. GABA, histamine, serotonin, catecholamines, bile acids, short chain fatty acids, lipopolysaccharides. This is the gut communication. This is the radio frequencies that's being transmitted over that frequency. This is what the gut-brain connection really is about. And this is a great study. Short chain fatty acids, mainly butyrate, but acetate, propionate as well. Butyrate becomes the main source of healthy short chain fatty acids. They cross the blood-brain barrier. They help maintain blood-brain barrier integrity. They influence microglial function. They modulate neurotransmitter levels. They can affect neuronal function, even neurogenesis, and they have potent anti-inflammatory properties in the gut and in the brain. So really, these short chain fatty acids are key in optimizing. They play a role in even GLP-1. So I'm giving a lecture in a couple of weeks, December 7th, an all-day lecture. If anyone's interested, you can go to my website and sign up for it. It's my annual functional medicine update. It's my yearly chance to catch everybody up on the latest, discoveries and fads and trends and in functional medicine. So I'll do a deep dive into GLP-1 agonists and how the gut plays a tremendous role and how we can mimic GLP-1 through things like short chain fatty acids and modulating the gut. So people are wanting to take the shortcut, and she was actually offered Ozempic as well. And there's no doubt it has a role to play, but there's so many things that we can do that are even better than Ozempic without the side effects, because the side effect of GLP-1 agonists long-term is exactly the opposite of what we're trying to do. It causes more insulin resistance, more diabetes, and you get rebound weight gain in almost every single case. And we're seeing that data come in more and more, but hey, the pharmaceutical companies are going to make a few billion or a few trillion. And, by the time the real science comes to light, they'll be like, oh, well, we got our few billion. But changing our short chain fatty acids becomes a really important. Studies on autism, studies on mood disorders, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, multiple sclerosis. So really, we have a lot that we can do. So short chain fatty acid administration, we want to produce short chain fatty acids through modulating our microbiome, but in short term, maybe 6 months or a year, giving people short chain fatty acids becomes a very important clinical tool. And this is something that we did for her, and I think it really turned her around. Mood and behavior, decreased anxiety-like behavior, reduced depressive-like behavior in forced swim tests, prevented stress-induced anhedonia in female urine sniffing tests. So these are all enhanced dopamine receptors and brain function. So mood and behavior, just all of these things that we know. I mentioned, and we're almost done here, I mentioned that she had multifocal dysbiosis. We're starting to get the picture. She was starting to get some odor in her genitourinary tract in her vagina, and so she did a swab at her regular provider, and they didn't find bacterial vaginosis. They didn't find trichomonas, but they did find candida, they did find candida. So again, it always is coming from the gut. She has multifocal dysbiosis, but we treat it by treating the gut first. So I ran a bacteriology culture through doctors' data, and this is what we found. It's much more sensitive than what you get at your doctor's office. So we found Gardnerella. So she did have bacterial vaginosis. The other tests missed it. She had staph, she had gamma hemolytic strep, she had E. coli. So yeah, she had that she needed to get treated. I do have a vaginosis protocol again. It's using the gut dysbiosis protocol as well as some suppositories. So you can email me as well. I only have a little over an hour with you, so I can't give everything away. But my point is today to give you the bigger picture of how we approach mental health, how we approach it from a functional medicine standpoint. We do have to look at that 12-point brain health model and make sure all of those are at least being addressed. She had a lot of stress in the morning, which kicked up her adrenals, but then it decreased dramatically. Anything over 100% decrease, and she had like a 500% decrease from 25 to 4.3 at noon, and that shows dramatic HPA dysregulation. So she also had low progesterone, likely because she was taking Mirena. She was taking, she had a hormonal IUD, which drops all progesterone levels. Her testosterone was suboptimal, so her hormones were truly out of balance. And then we did her neurotransmitters, and I've been using neurotransmitter testing in my practice for 15 years. It's one of the most important tools. It almost always correlates with what the patients are actually feeling, and it truly is a marker of the gut-brain axis. What is happening in the gut and the brain? We can see she had low tyramine, she had low norepinephrine. Her dopamine was elevated because of the drugs that she was on. She was on dopamine agonists. She was also on SSRIs, so her serotonin was in the normal range, but the 5-HIAA was elevated, and that means that her monoamine oxidase system was dramatically increased. And finally, her taurine was really low. So I want to get into taurine for a minute. So we can see that her dopamine to norepinephrine was blocked, right? Her dopamine was high, largely because of the medication, but it wasn't going into norepinephrine. And of course, without enough norepinephrine and epinephrine, you're not going to feel alert. You're not going to feel awake. You're not going to be able to process a lot of executive functions. If it's high, it's the same thing. You're too stressed and your executive function goes down, but it's absolutely necessary. So we can deduce that her dopamine beta hydroxylase was impaired. And this actually comes down to running some SNP testing. We didn't run SNP testing immediately. We did later, and we did find a SNP in her DBH. So she wasn't making a lot of DBH, so it becomes even more important, just like MTHFR, to support that. She had no vitamin C in her system. She had no copper, or very little, not enough anyway, to support that. She didn't have enough B vitamins, so she wasn't able to make that epinephrine and norepinephrine. And she wasn't able to then take norepinephrine to epinephrine with SAMe. So supporting those systems are really, really important. So we can support norepinephrine with tyrosine, with mucinopurines, with rhodiola, L-theanine, vitamin D, and the cofactors. The main cofactor here that I think made a big difference for her was P5P as well. We actually dosed way more than 5 milligrams. We ended up doing 50 milligrams a day for her P5P, and that made a big difference. Same thing with epinephrine. So taurine, though, I think was also, when I see low taurine, what I know about the brain is that it's under significant inflammation and degeneration. So just talk a little bit about the evidence of taurine. Sulfur-containing amino acid, major GABA agonist. So everyone with pain, chronic pain, can benefit from taurine. It's essential for neurotransmitter regulation. It's a potent antioxidant directly in the mitochondria. Now, taurine itself is not a free radical scavenger, but there are receptors for taurine on the mitochondria that stimulate glutathione production. So it's the second most abundant amino acid in the brain, highest in hippocampus and cerebellum, and it's critical for neuronal development. So it's another one of those pearls that I give to optimize fetal development. So we do a little bit of taurine and creatinine during preconception and during the prenatal period as well. It reduces anxiety. It increases BDNF and reduces depression. This is a great review article, taurine supplementation as a neuroprotective strategy with brain dysfunction due to metabolic syndrome and the insulin resistance. And again, all roads lead to Rome, which in this case is the mitochondria. And there are direct, taurine crosses the blood-brain barrier very easily. It has direct actions on the GABA receptors, which is calming and anxiolytic, as well as anti-nociceptive, so it reduces pain. And we dosed her at 1,000 milligrams 3 times a day. And that's often what you need, sometimes even more. Maintenance dose, 500 milligrams is fine, but sometimes you need 4 to 5 grams to get the benefit. So even if you're just looking for the cognitive enhancement effects, 500 to 1,000 milligrams a day, improves spatial memory, long-term potentiation, supports plasticity, focus and attention, cognitive performance. So all of these. So here's some of the dosing that you want to do. It's well tolerated up to 3 grams a day, which is what we did for her, but you do have to divide it up. You do have to, we want the area under the curve. So if you did 3,000 milligrams or 3 grams all at once versus 1,000 milligrams 3 times a day, your area under the curve will diminish by 70%. So you want that area under the curve. So let's sum up. Make the correct diagnosis first. What's really happening? She didn't have anxiety. She didn't have depression. She didn't have PMDD. She had nutritional deficiencies. She had leaky gut and dysbiosis, which led to systemic inflammation. She had a high viral load. She had mitochondrial dysfunction. She had an overload of her sympathetic nervous system. She had an increase in her MAO and COMT. She had some methylation abnormalities, I believe secondary to her nutrient deficiencies. And she was suffering from polypharmacy. So we put her on the anti-inflammatory diet. We started her with just a little bit of exercise. We started her with some mindfulness-based training, breathing exercises. We started doing some chiropractic treatments for her pain. We did laser and hyperbaric. We did start her off on what my nutrient concoction of IVs. It's different than a Myers. And again, you know what I'm going to say. You can email me, and I will give you my modified Myers or my Lundell nutrient IVs. That made a big difference. Here, we want to be careful about not doing NAD in the beginning, or doing a small amount of NAD. So maybe 50 milligrams or 100 milligrams, but I see so many doctors just jumping right to NAD, and it is burning their mitochondria out. You can do more damage. NAD should be down the road once you get all of these major issues dealt with, or at least starting really low. And then this is what we did with her supplementation. I'll let you read it. If you're playing this back, you can pause here and you can see all of the things that we did and how we addressed her entire biochemical system. Everything that showed up in her labs, we were able to address. All right. And that's, within 4 months. And she had been trying everything for years and years. Within 4 months, she lost 20 pounds. She wasn't sweating as much every day. She started to exercise a little bit for the first time in years and actually liked it because she didn't feel completely wiped out afterwards. She actually felt normal for an hour or two every day after 4 months, which is a huge progress because she hadn't felt normal in years. She had no more hospital episodes. She did have trouble with all the pills, so we simplified it a little bit. That is hard. That's the challenge for functional medicine. We want to give her a lot of stuff because there's a need, but sometimes you have to just do one step at a time. And within 4 months, she was off Remeron, gabapentin, and she went down to half dose of Wellbutrin. Her Prozac. So she stayed on the Wellbutrin and Prozac. That's a typo. And she started to wean off of her Vyvanse as well. That was the one that she didn't want to let go of, right? Because it's effective. It increases that norepinephrine and epinephrine in the brain and dopamine in the brain. But we were doing it naturally. So then after 9 months, she lost 40 pounds. Again, another typo up here. After 9 months, she lost 40 pounds. She got a full-time job. She did ketamine one more time, but this time it actually seemed to stick. So I'm not saying it's either or. If you want to do some of those guided treatments, doing it integratively while you're addressing the inflammation in the gut is what makes it stick. What I have a problem with is all these people doing ketamine therapy, and it is none of this stuff is being addressed, and it's doing more harm than good. So she does come in and do HBOT some weeks, and she continues to do IV once per month, and that seems to help her. But we have her on the right track, and we redid many tests. But I just wanted to show you that a lot of her neurotransmitters ended up going really high because she's kind of in that middle. I mean, things are working again. So you do get that, okay, well, things are going to be high for a little bit, some because we're supplementing and some because things are turning back on again. And but we see her 5-HIAA is now down, so she's not breaking down her serotonin, which allows her serotonin to stay up there. And running this test allows us to say, okay, we can even wean off your medications even more because we have the evidence that things are working. And so, after a year after this test, she was off of all of her medications. She still takes the Vyvanse occasionally. That is one of the hardest things to get people off of. She was on it since she was 12. So it truly is kind of, the brain becomes 100% dependent on that. I think, another year we can probably get her off of it, but she's kind of resistant to that. So that's how we did it. And so I'll open it up to some questions. I know we went way over. Thank you everyone for hanging in there. Thank you, Doctors Data. I know you like to keep things around an hour. But hey, I think doing this in 90 minutes was a pretty good feat. I'm happy to stay later and answer some more questions. This will be recorded, as I said. And if you want to know more about my courses, please visit my website. We go through we have 6 modules. I just added another one. We cover everything from methylation and lab testing to immunology, gastroenterology, endocrinology, and finally, my mentorship program. I'm starting another one in just a couple of months. It's only limited to 14 doctors. I already have most of it filled. I've got about 4 spots left. So if you're interested, it is one-on-one. You get one-on-one with me as well as a small group twice a month. And we go through exactly how to implement everything. So if you want to do both courses together, my nutritional pathology certification course, as well as the mentorship course, then that's 2 different things. We'll give you $750 discount on both of them if you buy them together. So we've got the bundle price on my website, and then we've got a special Doctors Data price. We'll give everybody that code in a follow-up email. And I'm happy to talk to anybody about it. If you want to call me, set up a time, we can talk about it. And we go through whatever you need, whether it's your own health or your patients, interpreting labs, setting up your practice, everything. And I have a lot of people who, some people are on their 3rd or 4th functional medicine mentorship program now because they get so much out of it. So it's $600 a month or single payment discount of $29.95. And the next one's beginning February of 2025. Sorry, I shouldn't say 2024, it's 2025. So February of 2025. And like I said, I've only got 4 spots left. So thanks again for Doctors Data having me here. And I always enjoy these. So